commemorative service for the 13th Queensland apology from the government to the mothers, the children, the survivors who were impacted by their very barbaric, cruel, historic adoption policies. I'll keep this short, people don't really want to hear from the MC. I just want to say that the toilets, if you go out there, turn right into the bar, toilets are just over there, there's morning tea. We'll hear from the speakers, most of the speakers, and then we're going to have lunch. So we'll keep it casual. While you're eating lunch, we'll hear from Leanne Matton, who's our guest speaker, and also a survivor of forced adoption, and a psychologist. And then we'll have question time. So welcome, thank you everyone for coming. We know there are lots of survivors in this room. There are mothers, we've got adoptees, we've got activists, nearly all of them. We've got Rent a Crowd, who, thank you everybody, has come along to cheer Lily on and all the people on and support everybody. So thank you, and there's lots of faces here from my memoir writing group, so thank you especially that they're here, but they're all survivors, and you'll be hearing some of those stories later. So first off, I just wanted to say that, for those that don't know, on the 27th of November 2012, the then Queensland Premier, the Honourable Campbell Newman, made a historic apology for past forced adoption policies and practices in Parliament on behalf of the Queensland Government Legislative Assembly. That apology followed on the apology from Julia Gillard, the then Prime Minister, the Premier, who gave her own apology, and it also followed the recommendations that were made by the Senate committee, who held an inquiry into forced adoption policies and practices. And the apology in Queensland came from recommendations made by the Senate to the federal Parliament to apologise, to offer national apologies and state and territory apologies to all the survivors. So Julia Gillard's apology, I just thought I'd read just a sentence from it so that you get a sense of where it was coming. It was a very heartfelt apology, and it was made in the march in the Grand Hall in Canberra.
Eight hours a day, 5 days a week. That's pretty typical of what was going on there. And this is what the laundry looked like on the outside to the world. Quite a nice building, very colonial, whatever, and hiding all the misery that went on behind the walls, the back of it. So here we have the infamous 5. But actually the infamous 5, I call it, the infamous 5. So they were the Mother Superiors of different homes and orphanages and whatever. And the one on the far right is Mother Leanne. And she was the mother that was responsible for the home at the time when I was incarcerated there. So the other nuns were different, like Rockhampton, big homes and that, where they kept children that were commonly known as forgotten Australians. They were incarcerated in children's homes. So a lot of abuse happened there. So that gives you an idea about the people that were running these places. Right, she's cuddling the baby, and the Magdalene home also catered for women that were disabled, or they'd been there a long time, they had nowhere to go, or they had some problem, so they lived there in that situation and used to help out, in the home or the laundry or whatever. So, you know, when the mothers left the home, they may have taken care of the baby. So there's a couple of carers there with a couple of babies. So, English, but anyway, they allowed me to have my suitcase. And inside the suitcase I had a little Kodak camera, and it had 4 films left on it. So they let me have my stuff, and I was fortunate, I suppose, to be able to take some photos of some of the girls in there. We were all, when we first went into the home, right, we were all given a white shift, and we all got that there, and a pair of thongs and whatever, you know, that was our uniform. We used to be able to sit down and you know, talk to each other, or in a recreation hall, or watch television or something, listen to the radio. But I did a little story many years ago about, you know, how I was at that particular time, you know, sitting there on a Saturday night, because before, when I was a very ordinary young teenager, my sister Jenny and I used to go into Brisbane and go to this disco. You know, I'd been working for 3 years before I put into this. So it's called Saturday Nights at Holy Cross. A song, a memory, a place of sadness. A song triggers my memory and I'm taken back in time to a place of incredible sadness. It's Saturday night, and I'm locked away from the world at Holy Cross. It is the saddest part of my week. There are no sheets to fold or television to watch to take my mind off the happy Saturday nights that I spent not so long before I was locked away. Sitting around the old wooden radio with some of my friends, we would sit there and listen to the latest songs. We would tell each other about other Saturday nights when we were outside enjoying life. Did you ever go here? Did you ever go there? Telling each other of the exciting places we used to frequent. We'd heard the same stories over and over again, and yet it was like hearing them again for the first time. By remembering every minute we were going beyond the walls and transferring ourselves into a place full of music and dancing. We were singing and having fun, being what we were. Young girls, enjoying ourselves, not hurting anyone, not the bad girls that had been locked up and forgotten. Then Sandy Posey's voice singing from the radio, I've got a boy who's waiting for me to come home, watching the clock all alone. And then I was back to reality. Where is he now? I wonder, is he playing his guitar for somebody's party? Is he thinking of me? Is he with another girl who was looking at him the way I did? I could feel my heart sobbing. Then I would think of my baby, the little round ball that was growing inside of my stomach, wondering what was going to happen to us. And then the radio would blast out the Beatles, and I was back to the disco again, drinking make-believe rum and coke, shaking my tambourine and dancing with my sister Jenny. 10 o'clock, says the nun watching us. Time to go to bed. Up the stairs into the long dormitory, and the iron gate slams shut behind me, and the key is turned. In the dark I can cry for all the Saturday nights gone and for the lonely ones to come. And I think a lot of young women, young girls and everything probably went through that same situation of just sitting there thinking, waiting for, you know, something so traumatic that was going to print on their life till the day they die. And there's a lot of young women that were in these places that never, ever got free from them. So that's my story, and you're going to hear now from the daughters of Holy Cross, whose mothers were, and they have a different story to tell how they feel about, where they were, I suppose, in one sense, incarcerated. So we can invite along our next speaker. That's thank you.
For many years, but in doing that, I wanted to learn what that actually meant and how that came to be. So I did do a lot of research and was able to find out a lot about how this all started. The Magdalenes was an organisation that was run in Ireland originally by the Catholic system. Sister Ellen Whitty came out here to Australia. She and Archbishop Durig, who was the Archbishop of Brisbane at the time, were renowned. They were involved in the building of Bill Hallows, Gregory Terrace, the Brisbane Cathedral, the Matton Hospital, and they set up the Wooloowin laundries. So that's how that establishment came into being many, many years ago. My situation was my mother came out from England. She was involved in the racing industry over in England. Her father was a racehorse trainer, and they had friends who were out here in Toowoomba. They sent their daughter out here to be a nanny and a jillaroo on the property at Torrington Station outside of Toowoomba. My mother was a happy-go-lucky girl, and the big thing in Toowoomba in the day, which is why we've had a lot of trouble getting any information, because a lot of politicians from the country areas have a lot of dark secrets. Now, she was living in Toowoomba, and every Saturday night they had what they called the machinery shed dances. I'm a product of those machinery shed dances. My parents met at that dance. I don't know for how long they were involved, but she became pregnant. Now, my father, I believe, was from a fairly affluent family in Toowoomba. He, of course, is a young man. When she told him that she was pregnant, he goes, "Can't be mine." And I think that's a reaction you get out of most young men, at first, because they'd be in disbelief. My mother ran and disappeared. She never wanted to see him again, never did. But she went back to Torrington, and the lady who was in charge of Torrington Station was a very Catholic lady. She took her to see the priest in Toowoomba, who made all the arrangements for her after the new year to be sent to Wooloowin. She was sent to Wooloowin, and this is where I learned about my information of Wooloowin was from Lily, because she was actually in the home at the same time we worked out. Because I'm May 1967 and her son is 58. Sorry? 58. 68? 58. October. September. Yeah. And she was there basically at the same time as my mother. So
let the ripples take me homebound, tasting in the salty water, losing myself to be again found. They told me I was your daughter. Infinite longing, phosphorus surface Towards
been said about these topics in relation to adoption, except attachment. We know a little bit about attachment from some really unethical experiments that were done in the 1950s. So we can't really say we didn't know about attachment when the forced adoption era came along, but some of the other topics, they're a little bit newer and possibly haven't really been discussed in relation to this topic. Amygdala has taken over. So we call that, it's like hijacking the system. And so what happens is the amygdala gets bigger, the hippocampus, which is the area for learning, for memory, for how we move through space, it gets smaller. And so some of these changes are permanent, not because they can't be undone, but because we don't have corrective experiences, because we don't understand this. So we don't do the things that people need in order to reverse these things. So the impacts of these situations can be felt well into adulthood. So you might have someone who has severe separation anxiety or is really highly sensitive from things that happened in the first months of their life. And now they're in their 40s or 50s, but the brain hasn't really been able to correct this because we don't really get the opportunities to do this, even in therapy, because we didn't understand this until recently. On the baby's first word, first steps, first day at school. As Colleen talked about, the mirroring, when we grow up in a family that's unrelated to us, we don't see, this person has my eyes, or I get my love of animals from this person, or, there's none of that. We're just kind of in isolation. Racial identity, that's a whole topic on its own. And our name, my original name was Michelle, and when I meet people with that name, I think, you've got my name. I actually like my name, but I think of Michelle as my name because that was the name that was on my original documents, but it was changed. So grief is not an emotion, it's sadness, it's anger, it's all of those things, but it's a bodily felt process. So it affects our digestion, it affects a whole lot of other things in our system. So grief is involuntary, it's what we feel when we lose attachment, but mourning is the voluntary part of that. That's what we do to metabolise grief. That's really what trauma and grief need as well. But how do you do that when not only is your loss not seen as a loss, it's actually seen as a celebration. Most adoptees have experienced telling someone you're adopted and having them say, "Oh, how lovely," and yeah, you were chosen, and we should be grateful. So that makes it really hard to go through this metabolizing process when it's called disenfranchised grief. So and ambiguous loss. I think a few years ago there was a movie with Colin Friels. He was in a same-sex relationship and his partner died, and he was prevented from taking part in the funeral and all the memorials because the relationship wasn't recognised. So that's a really painful example of a disenfranchised grief process. So with grief, the louder the symptoms, the less metabolisation is happening. I used to teach counselling students, and every term they would ask me the same question: what happens if a client is going over and over the same thing and is stuck and won't move on? How do you confront them? And I would say to them, the problem is not the client. It just means that you're not providing what they need to metabolise this process. People don't over and over the same thing because they're enjoying it. They're not doing it for pity or attention or to lay blame. They're doing it to seek co-regulation and attunement and empathy. And that's traditionally not what happens in therapy. I mean, even my training was about goal setting and strategies and what do we do and what homework will you do, instead of just holding space for people to process these really huge traumas and losses. Do anything about that. The way we move out of survival mode, and this is just really summarised a whole body of work into 2 bullet points here, but basically what we're doing is saying most of my energy is in the broom cupboard. I've only got this much to work with right now, so I need to honour that rather than overriding it and always being in deficit, which is really hard in a society where, you know, one of the common sayings is go hard or go home. You know, it's really hard to say, actually, I don't have the energy for that today, or I'm not coming into work today because I'm really feeling depleted. So we just live in deficit. You know, we're not just running on empty, we're below empty. So what we want to do is increase our capacity by staying with the felt sense of these feelings that we haven't processed. And they're not just feelings, they're sensations. And that's really scary, so we do have to do it little by little and take those things out of the storage shed and start accessing that energy again for everyday life after that. There's a before and an after, and there's no returning to that, and that is not the goal. For adoptees, there's no pre-trauma identity, so we really have nothing to go back to. But we can build a life around what has happened, so it's not the whole of life. You know, there's this, but, you know, I'm an adoptee, I'm also a psychologist, I'm also a wife, I'm also a writer, and so we want to spend our time in those places as well. But this loss is also part of our story, and we don't have to ignore that. So, you know, part of grieving is letting what hurts hurt. But we don't have to spend our whole lives in that. But we also don't have to ignore it. So I think that's all I had. Yeah, so I've got a Facebook page where I post about these sort of things, and I've also written a memoir that goes into more depth about a lot of these topics. It's going around publishers at the moment trying to find a home, so fingers crossed it will be out there eventually. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Leanne. It's very insightful. As I said, she's coming from a whole different perspective.
Look towards the sky, above the ocean's blue. Eagles soar above as I look into you. You and I together stand, reach